For the Sake of My Children, a novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This is an intriguing epic story which resonates with love, resilience, courage, and sacrifice. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs for a review to be printed in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel narrates the life story of an Australian girl who fell in love with a Saudi man. Then she converted to Islam, married her Arab lover, and traveled with him to the Islamic world. This book is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on a true love affair between a former Christian girl and a Muslim immigrant. All names, characters, places, and events are either the product of the author's imagination or used literary. Therefore, any resemblance to actual people, living or dead, events, or locales is merely coincidental. Chapter 12. Love relationship is forbidden in Islam. During attending these women's gatherings in Afghanistan, the Australian wife, Irshad, became a warm friend to a Canadian family. This family lived in Canada for a long time before returning to Afghanistan. For this reason, all the family members speak English well. The family consists of 2 daughters, their father and their mother. The mother is known as Shahinaz, her daughters are Scheherazade and Shadiya, and her husband is Hassan. They were originally Afghan refugees in India who got resettled in Canada, and all of them obtained Canadian citizenship. The 2 daughters are 17 and 15 years old. The sisters, Scheherazade and Shadiya, studied in Canada and therefore can read and write and are not illiterate like other Afghan girls. Despite this, after their parents brought them back to Afghanistan, they were unable to continue their education because the Taliban government closed all girls' schools. Life in the Mujahideen camps in Kandahar City for the 2 Canadian daughters is like living in a maximum security women's prison. When they were in Canada, they enjoyed many things that they would not find or be allowed to do in their new, primitive society. When they were in Canada, their father was not deeply religious at the time and thus allowed them to socialize with their Canadian infidel friends and attend parties. They used to have a big TV in their house. Each of the sisters had an iPad, an iPhone, and a laptop. After their father became a radical Muslim, or rather a true believer in the teachings of Islam, and took them to Afghanistan, they felt like they were back in the Stone Age or the 7th century Arab society at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. The Australian wife, Irshad, loves Shanaz and her 2 daughters, and in a brief time they have become more than one family. She shared with them her bitter experience from the day she came to Saudi Arabia. She found that they shared the same aversion to the strict Islamic life in Afghanistan. They live in Mujahideen camps against their will. The main unsurmountable problem faced by the 2 educated daughters of Shahinaz is finding suitable husbands among these uneducated Mujahideen. From the first day they came to Afghanistan 2 years ago, Shahinaz has resisted all marriage proposals that her husband Hassan brought to any of her 2 daughters. She knows she may not be able to resist forever. Eventually, she must marry her 2 daughters because it is a great shame in that Islamic society for a girl to remain unmarried after reaching the age of menstruation. In Afghanistan, a 20-year-old unmarried girl is considered too old to find a husband. Besides, there is always a great fear that her sexual desire for a man might force her to fall in love with him, commit adultery with him, bear an illegitimate child, and destroy her family. Whether this fear was based on truth or not, this is exactly what eventually happened to the eldest daughter of Shahinaz. The Canadian girl Scheherazade does not have the same backward Islamic mentality as her primitive Afghan society. She believes that a girl should be allowed to choose her life partner, and that choice should come through love before marrying him. When the Australian girl Irshad was introduced to the Canadian family, Scheherazade already had a boyfriend. Her boyfriend is a handsome Arab boy from Syria. His parents recently moved from Damascus City to Kandahar City and joined the Mujahideen camps. Thus, he is a little enlightened compared to the other local boys in the camps. Arab Muslims have always considered themselves better than other non-Arab Muslims because of their knowledge of the Arabic language of the Quran. This superiority complex dates back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad and his 4 immediate Rashidun successors, who ruled the Muhammadan state after his death. For example, the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, used to call non-Arab Muslims al-Uluj, which means dirty or unclean slaves. With this mentality until the present time, the father of the Arab friend stood against the love relationship when he learned about the friendship between his Arab son and the Afghan girl, Scheherazade. However, the love affair between the Afghan sweetheart and her handsome Arab lover did not end. Both of them continued to meet each other under cover of night. Despite this, when Scheherazade's father learned of his daughter's love affair, he approached the father of the Syrian lover and demanded that they either marry the two at once or immediately end that shameful and forbidden relationship. Alas, the father of the Syrian boy turned down the offer of Shahrazad's Afghani father and promised to persuade his Arab son to stop contacting the Afghani girl. Despite this promise, the Afghan father fears that his beautiful daughter will continue to meet the Syrian handsome youth and commit adultery with him and become pregnant with an illegitimate child. So, on the same day, the Afghan father conducted the marriage of his educated daughter with an uneducated Taliban boy in the mosque without her permission or consent. When Shahinaz learned that her daughter's marriage had been done to an uneducated Taliban boy, she quarreled with her husband Hassan and begged him to cancel the marriage contract. But her husband is a stubborn man and stood firm in his decision. The mother is afraid that her daughter will kill herself when she finds out about her arranged marriage. To avoid such an eventuality, she went to her Australian friend and asked for her advice. Irshad told the Canadian mother that she must first inform her daughter of the marriage contract. Secondly, she must ask her Afghan daughter to inform her Syrian friend of her father's decision and her arranged marriage, which took place in the mosque without her consent. If the friend agrees to her plan to escape the predicament of an arranged marriage, the two lovers must escape from the Mujahideen camps and flee to a secular country like India and marry in a court there without the knowledge and consent of their Muslim parents. Then the newly married couple must claim asylum and then emigrate as persecuted refugees to a Western country and live there happily ever after. The Australian woman thought in this way the unsurmountable problem of the two lovers can be solved and they can have a successful conclusion. However, if the Australian wife had foreseen what her advice would do to that Canadian Afghan family, mother and her 2 daughters, she might never have advised them. Mother Shahinaz and her daughter Scheherazade followed the advice of the Australian wife, Irshad, step by step. As the Afghan mother expected, upon hearing the disturbing news of her arranged marriage to someone she did not love, who was uneducated and ignorant, the educated Canadian daughter threatened to commit suicide before the retarded Taliban man came to consummate his marriage to her. To avoid the suicidal death of one of her daughters, Shahinaz encouraged her daughter Scheherazade to call her Arab boyfriend and inform him of her forced, arranged marriage, which took place without her consent. As the Australian wife expected, the Syrian boyfriend immediately agreed to elope with his Afghani girlfriend. The two lovers planned to elope during the night. With her mother's blessing, Scheherazade fled under cover of night with her Arab friend. They eloped just 2 days after the arranged marriage took place at the mosque. The newlywed bride Scheherazade is supposed to be sent to her Afghan grooms tent a week after the marriage contract between her father as her guardian wali and the illiterate Taliban boy as her husband was conducted and signed. Unfortunately, things did not turn out the way the Australian woman Irshad and the Canadian mother Shahinaz expected. The two lovers are captured by the armed night watchmen of the refugee camps as they flee under cover of the dark night. First, these armed guards had gang-raped the beautiful virgin Canadian girl Scheherazade and beat her handsome Arab boyfriend with sticks and whips to death. Secondly, they brought them to the Mujahideen camps and testified falsely that they found them completely naked and having forbidden sex at night outside the camps. They swore by Almighty God by placing their right hands on the Holy Quran and claimed that more than 4 of them had seen with their own eyes the fully erect dick of the Arab boy was fully inserted inside the Afghan exposed hairy pussy just like the Mirud in the Macau, and fucking her as the male dog fucked its female doggy on the open place. The mullah, who heard the accusation of adultery, became angry and demanded that the adulterer and adulteress be tried according to Islamic law. The other mullahs agreed to punish the married Afghani girl, Shahrazad, and her Syrian boyfriend, according to God's book, the Holy Quran, and the blessed Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. Therefore, all the Mujahideen mullahs passed a collective judgment on the 2 adulterous lovers. According to their ruling, which they relied on in the Book of God and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, the Syrian boy must be flogged 100 lashes for committing adultery with a woman who is not his wife. As for the married Afghani girl, she was sentenced to death by stoning because she committed adultery with a man while she was married to another Muslim man. The Australian wife, Ershad, immediately collapsed when she heard about the decision of the camp's elders against the 2 innocent lovers. She held herself responsible for advising the Afghani girlfriend to run away with her Syrian boyfriend. She knows she can never forgive herself for giving such erroneous advice to the 2 intimate lovers in that primitive and backward Islamic society. So, she begged her Saudi husband to intervene and ask other Muslim men to join him in preventing these heartless mullahs from stoning the innocent girl, Scheherazade. Mustafa responded by scolding Ershad. He told her, as an honest Muslim, he could not stop God's judgment on those who deliberately crossed his limits and had an adulterous relationship with a married woman. When her Arab husband, Mustafa, refused to help, the Australian woman, Ershad, ventured out of her tent on her own and approached some of these mullahs in the training centers. She confesses to them that she is the one who gave the wrong advice to the Afghan lover and her Arab lover. The mullahs refused to change their rule and asked the Saudi husband to remove his foreign wife from them. Mustafa apologized to the sheiks and promised them that he would deal with his disobedient foreign wife. Accordingly, the Australian wife was mercilessly flogged by her Arab husband for disobedience and imprisoned in her tent until the day when the adulterous wife Scheherazade was stoned. It was only on that day that her husband released her from her ropes and allowed her to witness the public execution of the adulterous Afghan girl. According to Islamic law, a married adulteress must be buried up to her neck in the ground and stoned by all Muslims. The so-called adulterous wife, Scheherazade, was brought to an open place in the middle of the tents to carry out God's judgment on her for transgressing his limits. Her hands and feet were tied and fixed with strong ropes. Every Muslim man was given as many stones as he could carry and throw. Even male children were given stones that day. Then some men dug a hole and buried Scheherazade up to her shoulders. Only her neck and head were visible to stone her to death and kill her. The Australian wife, Ershad, can forget all the evils, abuse, and violence she saw in the Islamic world committed against Muslim women and female children. But she cannot erase from her memory the brutal and inhumane punishment that innocent Afghan girl was unjustly subjected to. She cannot forget Scheherazade's dying screams when those stones began to fall like a swarm of locusts or a hail of bullets on her beautiful face. Like bullets fired at close range, her white face was disfigured, her long black hair was cut off, and her head was smashed like she was hit by swords and spears. Within minutes, blood covered her body. Her head was smashed, and her long hair was cut off. The Western girl Ershad did all she could in those desperate moments, but she could not prevent these ruthless Muslim barbarians from performing their religious duty. Before the innocent Afghan girl, Scheherazade, breathed her last, the Australian wife, Ershad, fell to her knees and passed out. The memory of that fateful day continues to haunt the Australian wife throughout her life. Stoning the innocent girl Scheherazade has dire consequences for her family as well. On the same day, when she was brutally executed by these savages, her sister Shadia poured kerosene on her body and set herself on fire. She died before they could take her to the hospital. The Afghan-Canadian mother Shahinaz could not bear the horrors of the brutal execution of her daughter Scheherazade and the suicidal death of her daughter Shadia, and became a mad woman. The Syrian lover managed to survive 100 lashes on his bare back, but he became disabled and was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. When the Australian wife, Ershad, learned of what happened to the Canadian-Afghan mother, Shahinaz, and her 2 daughters, Scheherazade, Shadia, and the Arab boyfriend, she held herself responsible for all the evils that befell them because of the accident and her wrong advice. She understood that she could not forgive herself for the rest of her life. Chapter 13. The Martyr of the Janatal Firdaus. 5 years passed while the horribly abused Australian wife was staying against her will in the Mujahideen camps in Afghanistan. She went through hundreds of violations and saw with her own eyes the countless horrifying tortures that Muslim women, old and young, are subjected to. If anyone were to tell her what she had experienced or witnessed happening to other Muslim females in the Islamic world while in Australia, she would not have believed it. She witnessed wives brutally beaten by angry husbands, daughters killed in honor killings, female genital mutilation of Muslim children, and many young women stoned to death by angry mobs. During those 5 years, the memory of the brutal murder of the late innocent Canadian girl did not leave her vision for a moment. Often, while she slept, she had horrific nightmares and woke up in the middle of the night and began to weep bitterly for Scheherazade, who was stoned to death, her sister Shadia, who was burned alive, and their mother Shahinaz, who became a lunatic woman. Every day and night, the Australian wife regrets that she advised the Canadian mother, Shahinaz, to encourage her Afghan daughter, Scheherazade, to escape with her Syrian lover. Ershad knew that the only relief for her was to escape from those hellish camps to a place where there was nothing to remind her of that black day when the innocent Canadian girl was buried under a pile of stones and bricks. No matter what may happen to her, the Australian mother is determined not to leave her children in the Islamic world and flee to the Western world. In her heart, however, she hoped that one day she would be able to escape with her children and return to her native land, Australia. Albeit this hope seemed impossible for her to fulfill without divine intervention. When the Australian Ershad and her Saudi husband, Mustafa, came to Afghanistan, they had 4 children. In the first 3 years of their stay in Kandahar city, they had 3 more children. Meanwhile, her Arab husband was trained in many military tactics of the terrorist groups Al-Qaeda and Taliban. In a brief period, he became one of the most trusted Mujahideen. He was dispatched on many missions and carried out jihad war for the sake of God in many countries in the Middle East and North Africa. 3 years later, he was sent on a 2-year mission. During this prolonged period, whenever his Australian wife, Ershad, inquired about her Saudi husband, Mustafa, she was told that he was alive and doing God's work in some Muslim countries. When she insisted on knowing the whereabouts of her Saudi husband, the Australian wife learned that her brave Arab man was training young Mujahideen in some Arab and African countries. She was also told that neither women nor children were allowed in those dangerous training areas. During this lengthy period of his absence, the Australian wife never received a letter from her Saudi husband. Therefore, his exact whereabouts remained a hidden mystery to her. However, this mystery did not last forever. One day, one of the Afghan mullahs, the emir, or the prince leader of her husband, came to her tent with a happy smile on his bearded face and conveyed to her the so-called good news. He shouted out God is great or Allah Akbar 3 times and praised the Prophet Muhammad twice before informing her of the suicide death of her brave Saudi husband, Mustafa al-Shamari, as a martyr to God in New York City, USA. And he soon added that her brave Arab man is now in paradise, enjoying himself by fucking his 72 virgins and breaking their hymens while drinking from the tasty rivers of wine, milk, and honey. Upon hearing the sad news, the Australian widow Ershad fell to her knees and wept bitterly for a long time. The truth of the matter is that she mourned for her 7 orphaned children instead of grieving the so-called martyrdom of her brave Arab man. The Australian wife has always expected that one day her Saudi husband will blow his body to smithereens for God's sake. He told her several times that he was going on a dangerous mission and might sacrifice his life for the sake of jihad in the way of Allah against the ritually unclean infidels, but he came back alive repeatedly. All of these missions did not last more than a few weeks or a few months. For reasons unknown to her at the time, her Saudi husband's last jihadi mission lasted more than 2 years. During that prolonged period, the Australian wife was left alone to take care of her 7 young children. Fortunately, the Mujahideen and their families in the camps are provided with free food and clothing. In addition, families receive some cash for their other needs. Even the most married widows who have no surviving husbands are entitled to financial support from the Islamic treasury of the Mujahideen camps, which is called the Bait al-Mal. Meanwhile, the Australian mother always yearned to escape those concentration camps, which are like death camps. She does not want her children to grow up in that abusive, primitive society. What a pity, there is no way out for her and her children. She knows as long as her husband is alive, she can never dream of escaping out of the camps without being caught and brought back. She knew and understood that the punishment for a married fugitive woman or a widow would be harsh. Irshad remembered that innocent Canadian girl, Scheherazade, who was caught by some armed Mujahideen night guards as she was escaping from the camps with her Syrian lover. Irshad recalls that the Afghani girlfriend was first gang-raped by these armed guards and later stoned to death for the alleged crime of adultery and her escape from her legal Muslim husband with her Syrian boyfriend. Therefore, the Australian widow Irshad did not take such a crucial step. Besides, she does not want to leave her 7 children and flee alone to her homeland. She has decided without her kids she's not going anywhere. Despite this, after the so-called martyrdom of her late Saudi husband, Mustafa, the Australian widow, Irshad, believed that she would be allowed to go with her 7 children to her native country, Australia. Therefore, a few days after she heard the news of the martyrdom of her brave Arab husband, the Australian widow approached the Emir himself, who informed her of his heroic martyrdom in jihad for the sake of God. Then she revealed to him her plan to return to her native Australian country with her 7 children. Before responding to her request, Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid took out a letter from his bag and handed it to her and asked her to read it aloud. The letter is written in plain English. Irshad read the letter with a trembling body and sweaty hands, while her heart beat loudly like an African drum. The official letter was written and signed by her Saudi husband, the brave martyr. And the Muslim hero martyr Mustafa al-Shamari mentioned in the letter that he has no objection if his foreign wife decides to go back to her country of origin, Australia, after his martyrdom in the jihad war against the American infidels, who are Satan worshippers, but she should not be allowed to take one of his 7 Muslim children with her to the land of infidels. And his 7 righteous sons must be a responsibility on the neck of the Emir, the venerable Sheikh Muhammad Abu Hamid, may God bless him. The blessed mullah must raise his Muslim children in Afghanistan. Moreover, his Australian wife should not be allowed to take his 7 children and travel with them anywhere outside the Mujahideen camps in Afghanistan, including his native Saudi Arabia, in case she wishes to perform Hajj rituals. But if his Australian widow, Irshad, decides to continue living in the Mujahideen camps in Kandahar city, she must be helped to find a devout Muslim man and marry him as her second husband. No matter how much the foreign widow Irshad begged and wept in front of Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, all her words and tears were in vain, as if they were water poured on a stone heart. The venerable Prince Sheikh Abu Hamid explained to her that her husband, the late hero martyr Mustafa al-Shamari, who now lives in Jannat al-Firdaus with the 72 virgins, does not want his Muslim children to grow up among the infidels. He said that in Australia, the 7 Muslim children of the gallant martyr Mustafa will be surrounded by drugs, alcohol, nudity, immoral and forbidden relationships between men and women, unmarried adulterers, gays, lesbians, sodomy, naked and half-clothed prostitutes, and other immoral and evil practices of the religiously and ritually unclean infidels while they live in their abhorrent state of disbelief and blasphemy. As a result, the Australian widow, Irshad, decided despite her desire to escape to sacrifice her life for the sake of her 7 children and remain in those infernal camps of Muslim mujahideen. But the real problem for the beautiful white foreign widow began after she completed her waiting period after the death of her Arab husband. According to Sharia, a married Muslim woman whose husband has divorced her or died and left her a widow may not marry another man until she has completed 3 months and 10 days. Irshad was surprised one day when she saw the old sheikh, Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, entering her tent with 4 mujahideen men, all of them bearded like him. Then the emir of her late husband told her that since she had completed the months of waiting period, she must marry another Muslim man or leave the camps. Moreover, the venerable sheikh suggested that he marry her himself if she decided to continue living among the mujahideen, who the only true Muslims in the world are because they are following the correct teachings of God's book, the Holy Quran, and the hadiths of the blessed Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be the best prayers and peace of Allah. The Australian widow politely declines his marriage proposal and tells him she can leave the camps with her 7 children. Mullah Abu Hamid told her that she could not be allowed to take the 7 Muslim children and travel to the land of the infidels. He gave her 1 week to make her final decision. Moreover, the Afghani mullah reminded the Australian widow of her late husband's letter in which he mentioned not to take his 7 children outside the Islamic land of Afghanistan. In this case, the Australian woman told Mullah Abu Hamid that she preferred to return to her country alone and leave her 7 children under his care as their legal guardian. When Irshad says that she will leave alone, she has a secret plan in her mind. She wants to travel alone to Pakistan and go to the Australian embassy in Islamabad city. She expected the embassy to issue passports, visas, and free airline tickets for her and her 7 children, and then help her obtain custody of them from Mullah Abu Hamid. Once the Australian widow Irshad received permission from the Afghani Emir Abu Hamid, she traveled alone from the Mujahideen camps to the Afghani-Pakistani border by truck. During her dangerous journey, she is constantly subjected to sexual and immoral harassment by the male passengers. Even the truck driver tried to rape her, but she had a fight with him and scolded him in front of all the other passengers. Then she traveled from the border by train to the Pakistani capital city, Islamabad. The Australian widow, Irshad Al-Shamari, decided to be honest and tell her embassy everything about her bitter experience in Saudi Arabia and her miserable life in the Mujahideen camps in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the honesty worked against her, and thus her application was rejected due to her association with Muslim terrorists for many years. Irshad pleaded her rejected case, claimed her innocence, and tried to convince the Australian embassy officials that she was not involved in any terrorist activities and that she herself was a victim of Islamic terrorism. In her appeal, she stated that she was kept captive and imprisoned in those Mujahideen camps against her will. Despite her pleas and tears, the Australian embassy again dismissed her case. When her request was rejected and all doors were closed in her face, the Australian widow decided to return to Afghanistan and marry the old Afghani man, Prince Mullah Muhammad Abu Hamid, who is 40 years older than her. The Australian widow was 30 years old at the time, and the old sheikh was nearly 70 years old. Everything the white mother Irshad did and decided to do was for the sake of her 7 innocent children. She is determined to endure all kinds of abuse and torture for their sake.